Hello everyone, this is Tom Fox with episode 16 of the FCPA Compliance and Ethics Report. I'm the author of Lessons Learned on Compliance and Ethics, Best Practices under the FCPA and UK Bribery Act, GSK in China, a game changer in compliance. If you have any questions, you can reach me at tfox@tfoxlaw.com. Today I wanted to visit with you about an area that doesn't get a lot of attention under the FCPA, but it does trip up some companies from time to time, and that's the area of charitable donations. Charitable donations can be an FCPA violation. We've had two enforcement actions involving charitable donations. They were both books and records violations. They were not criminal enforcement actions prosecuted by the Department of Justice. But together with those two enforcement actions and four opinion releases that I would like to visit with you about today, I think a clear path forward can be put together for anyone or any company that wants to engage in charitable donations, whether those donations are a one-off donation for a specific project, whether they're compelled giving required by the country as part of a remittance of profits, such as when you do work for PDVSA in Venezuela, or an overall corporate social responsibility component where a company may want to give back or indeed help a third world country in moving forward with business through a variety of mechanisms. So let's turn initially to the enforcement actions, and there are two. The first one was the Sharing Plow enforcement action. And Sharing Plow is a medical device company that got into trouble in Poland for donations to a charitable foundation, the Charitable Castle Foundation, which was run by the Director General, founded and run by the Director General of the Silesian Health Service. The donations in question were relatively small. In fact, over a 3-year period, the donations totaled just over $75,000, and some of the donations were under $1,000. Nevertheless, it was clear from the enforcement action that the donations were made to influence the Director General of the Silesian Health Service to direct, obtain, or retain business in the way of Sharing Plow. Additionally, there were payments made to the Charitable Castle Foundation, which were for services which turned out never to have existed, such as holding conferences at various castles. The Charitable Castle Foundation itself actually renovated castles throughout Poland. It had nothing to do with healthcare, the medical industry, medical devices, pharmaceuticals, or anything along those lines. It was clear from this enforcement action the reason for the charitable donations. Nevertheless, the enforcement action was a books and records violation because Sharing Plow recorded these charitable donations as marketing expenses. The second enforcement action, amazingly enough, involved not only the same country, but the same charitable foundation and the same foundation founder and president. Lilly got into trouble recently and had a civil complaint filed against it back last December for books and records violations and bribery schemes in 4 different countries, one of which was Poland. And in Poland, they got into trouble for the same reason that Sharing Plow did, for charitable donations to the Charitable Castle Foundation, once again founded and run by the Director General of the Silesian Health Service. In the enforcement action, it was clear that Lilly had made the charitable donations specifically to obtain or retain business or to obtain payments of contracts that they had outstanding. In the civil complaint, the SEC actually paired up in a chart the time, or the date rather, of the donations, and it was within 24 to 48 hours of a decision being made to send business Lilly's way. So it was fairly clear from the enforcement action the purpose of the donations. Once again, the Charitable Castle Foundation renovated castles, but it had nothing to do with the pharmaceutical industry, medical industry, health services in general. And this was outside of Lilly's normal donation pattern. Lilly got into trouble more than Sharing Plow because Lilly had an internal committee which evaluated requests for charitable donations, and this committee rubber stamped the request from the sales team in Poland to make these donations. Lilly violated its own internal policy by not properly evaluating the donation request, and that the donation requests were made outside of the healthcare industry. If you want to, there's nothing in the FCPA that prohibits you from making a donation outside the healthcare industry, if that is indeed the industry you're in. But if you do make such a donation and it's outside your normal pattern of giving, then you need to justify that, and you need to justify that in writing so that it can be documented. So once again, I get to say my FCPA mantra, which is the three most important things in FCPA compliance are document, document, document. Mark Mendelson, back when he was running the FCPA unit, advocated a common sense approach to charitable donations. One of the things he spoke about was precisely what I just mentioned, which was your normal pattern of giving. If you're in the pharmaceutical industry, the medical device industry, the medical supply industry, the healthcare industry, and you normally give within that sphere, and you change that, there needs to be a justifiable reason for doing so. Also, you need to try to dislink, it's my new most favorite word in FCPA compliance, dislink the donation from the decision maker who can direct business your way. So to the extent that a company can give money and it's directed towards an entity not linked to any decision makers, that's going to be a plus as well. You need to understand how the donation request was made, who made it, and where it's going to. Lilly had all of those mechanisms in place to evaluate those. Nevertheless, they failed to do so, and they sustained a books and records violation for that. One other very interesting thing that came up from the Lilly enforcement action was the idea of transaction monitoring in your sales. If you have a sales spike in a country, or indeed in a province like Silesia, I think it's a very good business practice to understand why you had that sales spike. If Lilly had looked at their charitable donations and seen that sales spiked dramatically in the province of Silesia at or near the time of these donations, I think it would have been a red flag would have been raised, and Lilly could have done additional investigation to determine that these events were tied together. But because of the disparate units and the siloed structure of the company, these dots were never connected, if I can use a very old metaphor from the Bush administration, and there was no transaction monitoring to determine why this had occurred. So those are the two enforcement actions. I think it's significant that the Department of Justice did not prosecute either company criminally, and they were books and records violations with civil fines only. Nevertheless, it points to some of the things that the department thinks are important. And this was further fleshed out by 4 opinion releases where companies submitted facts to the Department of Justice, and the Justice Department opined on whether or not the protections were sufficient and whether the department would move forward with a prosecution based upon the facts presented. So I'm going to have to go in these in a little bit of detail with you. The first one was Opinion Release 9501. And in this matter, an energy company wanted to operate a facility in South Asia, but there was no medical facility in the area. So they proposed a $10 million donation to the government in question of the country to assist in the construction of a facility. The donation would be made through a U.S. charitable organization and involve a South Asian LLC. The energy company stated that it would do 3 things with respect to this donation that I think are significant. First of all, the energy company said it would require certifications from all of the officers and directors involved that none of the money would be used for violations of the FCPA. Second, that none of the persons employed by the charity or the South Asian LLC company that the money would pass through were affiliated with the foreign government. And third of all, which is one key element through all of this, is trust but verify. That they said they would require audited financial statements after the donations were made. The second was Opinion Release 9702. And in this case, a U.S. company wanted to construct a utility plant in an unnamed country in Asia. And they proposed making a donation of $100,000 for the construction of an elementary school near the location of the utility. Before releasing the funds, the utility company indicated it would require certain guarantees from the government of the country in question regarding the donation, and that it would be used exclusively for, the money would be used exclusively for the construction of the school. And once again, the company would audit on the back end to make sure that the funds were properly used. The third one was a little bit more different, if I can say that, and interesting, but it shows the types of things that fall under the rubric of a charitable donation. And here, a U.S. company was doing business in Africa, and they wanted to put a pilot program in place to try to stem the flow of pirated copyright goods through a certain country. A large number of pirated goods were transshipped through a company, a particular African country. So the U.S. company wanted to make a donation to the Ministry of Finance of this country in question to hand out cash incentives to their customs inspectors to stop the shipment of these pirated copyrighted items. I don't know if they were movies or books or other copyrighted items. And the U.S. company put 5 protections in place that I think are important and worth noting. First of all, that the payments would be made to a bank account opened by the government in question. It would be subject to internal audits. The payments would be made by only upon confirmation of goods seized. The ministry itself would award the or make the awards. The U.S. company would not identify the individual customs inspectors from the country in question who would receive the money. The company would monitor the effectiveness of the program to determine whether there were increased stoppages of this pirated copyright material, and that the records would be kept for a period of time after the program stopped, which once again could be post-project audited. So lots of protections in place, but using a charitable donation in a fairly different way. The last one was, in many ways, the most comprehensive and the most interesting. In this situation, a U.S. company, which was a microfinancial institution which made humanitarian donations within a certain Eurasian company, wanted to move to a commercial status. That Eurasian country required that the U.S. company make a very large cash donation to in-country microfinancial institutions to allow them to take over this role. Unfortunately, the Eurasian company gave the U.S. company a list of, I think it was 10 or 11 microfinancial institutions. And the first thing that the U.S. company did was they engaged in extensive due diligence to determine whether or not any of the in-country microfinancial institutions were run or associated with governmental officials from the country in question. They did 3 rounds of due diligence. In each round, they reduced the number of possible candidates because of their affiliation with the government in question. And they finally came up with one candidate that was acceptable to the foreign government. At that point, the U.S. company sent an opinion or filed their opinion release, and it's unclear from the opinion release whether or not the company came up with these suggestions or protections, or the Department of Justice did, or the parties worked on them jointly. But there were 7 protections that were put in place in the opinion, or at least listed in the opinion release, that allowed the Department of Justice to indicate it would not take any enforcement action with regard to the U.S. company in question. And I'd like to just read these for you. Number 1, certification by the recipient that it would comply with all requirements of the FCPA. I previously mentioned the due diligence to confirm that none of the recipient's officers and directors were affiliated with the foreign government at issue. A requirement that the recipient provide audited financial statements. A written agreement from the recipient restricting the use of funds to humanitarian charitable purposes only. Number 5, steps to ensure that the funds were transferred to a valid bank account. 6, confirmation that the contemplated activities had occurred before the funds were distributed. And then once again, on the back end, trust but verify through ongoing auditing and monitoring of the efficacy of the program. This really laid out a series of steps that I think every U.S. company can take in any charitable donation situation with the FCPA. And now I'd like to turn to from a specific donation to another concept that seems to be growing, that's sort of come out of the corporate social responsibility movement. But nevertheless, some companies are being requested to make donations along the lines of the following. They're being asked to help local businesses in a third world country develop the tools, strategies, and techniques to compete on an international stage. They're being asked to do this, one, in the role of angel VC funders, so that they're actually making cash grants. Second is training, and that's not only training to be a subcontractor for the U.S. company in question. So, for instance, the energy industry in Houston, companies would train local companies to be subcontractors on site. But now they're being asked to do a wider variety of training to help provide actual business education to help these companies compete on a worldwide basis and compete and do business with other countries. So that the relationship it's much closer and more encompassing than sort of a one-off or just bringing a local contractor in to do work. That's brought up the interesting point of where should the training be delivered. Well, first of all, if you're in the energy industry, in the pharmaceutical industry, you're in a very specialized industry, it may be important for you to bring contractors to the United States or other Western countries to receive specific training. Particularly that's true in the energy industry, where highly technical training may need to occur. One of the things the Department of Justice obviously is going to look at is who's coming over for the training, how are you paying for the training, how are you paying for the transportation, is this really just a boondoggle? And I would urge you to document the reasons that you need to do your training in the United States, why you've brought one more or even a large group of people over for training, because I think the Department of Justice and the SEC respond to documentation to show why training should be delivered more efficiently and indeed better in the United States. And that training can include business training, training at universities. Many universities in the Houston area would put on some type of specific training program to help small businesses, and I see really nothing different in this type of training. The point is that there's a wide variety of types of charitable donations that can be made. Certainly cash is one, certainly in-kind donations, construction. We even had the opinion release where rewards were going to be paid for enforcement of copyright laws. Once again, you're only limited by your imagination. And please do not let the FCPA or your fear of the FCPA stop you from making that. The key is to document your decisions, to have a process, to follow that process. If you deviate from that process, you can do so if you have a legitimate business reason and you document that reason to do so. Once again, both Sharing Plow and Lilly got into trouble for books and records violations, so the key there is to accurately record what donations you make, how you make them, who you make them to, what they're used for, and then you're back-end auditing and monitoring to determine that the funds were actually used. It can be a very powerful tool. Corporate social responsibility has gone a long way, and indeed donations go a long way towards helping foster good relations, international relations, both for U.S. companies and I'm of the opinion for the U.S. government as well. So that's charitable donations under the FCPA. Once again, I'm Tom Fox. If you have any questions about this, you can email me at tfox@tfoxlaw.com. Thank you very much.